158,000 adult Americans converted to Catholicism in 2023 alone. But here's what nobody's talking about. 64% of them are under 40, 43% hold graduate degrees, and they're embracing the exact things modern culture told them to reject: ancient rituals, absolute truth claims, and submission to an institution founded before the printing press existed. Meet Tyler Chen, a 28-year-old software engineer from San Francisco who codes AI algorithms by day and attends Latin Mass by night. He was raised atheist in one of America's most secular cities, attended UC Berkeley, worked at a tech startup that offered meditation pods and kombucha on tap, every amenity designed to optimize his life. Last Easter, he was baptized Catholic at a 200-year-old mission church, choosing a faith that tells him there are moral absolutes he didn't invent, that his body has rules he can't reprogram, and that suffering has meaning his optimization mindset can't decode. This isn't a story about your grandmother's Catholicism, boring liturgies, empty pews, and abuse scandals driving everyone away. This is about the most unexpected religious trend in America. Young, educated, predominantly liberal city-dwelling adults are converting to the world's oldest and most hierarchical Christian institution in numbers that shock even Catholic bishops. Today we're investigating the Catholic conversion boom. Who's converting, what they're finding, why the most ancient practices are attracting the most modern minds, and what this reveals about the spiritual crisis of contemporary life. To understand why this boom is happening now, you need to see the data that contradicts everything we thought we knew about religion in America. While overall Christian affiliation in America dropped from 75% to 63% between 2009 and 2023, Catholic adult conversions have quietly climbed. The Archdiocese of Los Angeles confirmed 6,400 adult converts in 2023, up 34% from 2019. New York saw 4,800. Even in the secular Pacific Northwest, Seattle's Archdiocese reported a 28% increase in RCIA, Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults enrollment. But the demographics break every stereotype. According to CARA, Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, the average Catholic convert in 2023 is 32 years old. College educated, 78% have bachelor's degrees, 43% have graduate degrees. Previously unaffiliated with any religion, 41%, or raised Protestant, 34%. Lives in an urban area, 67%. Politically moderate to liberal on most issues except sexual ethics. This isn't rural, conservative America finding religion. This is Brooklyn, Austin, Portland, and Denver, America's progressive cultural centers experiencing an influx of young professionals choosing the most institutionally traditional form of Christianity available. The journey follows a pattern that Catholic priests are now recognizing. It starts with intellectual curiosity. Someone reads a theology book, listens to a podcast, encounters a Catholic philosopher. Then comes aesthetic attraction. They visit a beautiful old church, experience a traditional liturgy, encounter sacred art that moves them. Finally, there's existential need, the recognition that their optimized, curated, self-invented life philosophy isn't sustaining them through suffering, grief, or the simple question of what it all means. Father Marcus Reeves, who directs RCIA at a parish in Washington, D.C., told me, 10 years ago, converts came from Protestant backgrounds, often through marriage. Now I'm baptizing atheists, agnostics, people raised with no religion. They're Harvard graduates, lawyers, doctors, consultants, and they're not looking for a casual spiritual experience. They want the full thing: daily mass, confession, fasting, devotional practices. They want difficulty. What makes this boom extraordinary is what converts are actually signing up for. They're not choosing a modernized, therapeutic Christianity. They're choosing the hardest version available: Latin Mass and liturgical tradition. The traditional Latin Mass, celebrated exactly as it was before the 1960s reforms, is experiencing explosive growth among young Catholics. St. John Cantius Church in Chicago, which offers traditional liturgy, has seen attendance triple since 2015. Their Sunday Latin High Mass regularly draws 800-plus attendance, 70% under 40. Grace Hartman, a 26-year-old public defender from Chicago, describes her first Latin Mass. "I didn't understand a word. There was incense, bells, the priest facing away from us. Everyone knew exactly when to kneel, when to stand. It felt like entering something ancient and massive that didn't care if I understood it. And that was what I needed, something that existed before me and would exist after me, something I couldn't customize." These converts are embracing complexity, learning Latin responses, understanding liturgical seasons, participating in hour-long ceremonies where nothing is explained for modern sensibilities. In a culture of infinite customization, they're choosing one-size-fits-all. In an age of personal truth, they're submitting to truth claims made by dead men in different languages. Confession and moral accountability. Perhaps most radically, converts are flocking to confession, the practice of verbally admitting sins to a priest. In an era of self-affirmation and therapeutic language that avoids words like sin, young Catholics are lining up to say, "I was wrong. I need forgiveness. I need external moral authority." James Park, a 31-year-old marketing director from Austin, explained, "Modern therapy tells you to embrace yourself, that shame is toxic, that you're enough as you are. Confession tells you the opposite. You're broken, you've genuinely failed, and you need grace you can't generate yourself." That honesty was like oxygen after drowning in positivity culture. Data from parishes confirms this. Confession rates among converts are 340% higher than among cradle Catholics. They're going weekly, sometimes more. They're embracing the discomfort of moral scrutiny in an age that celebrates radical self-acceptance. Celibacy, and countercultural disciplines. Catholic converts aren't just attending Mass. They're adopting rigorous practices, fasting on Fridays, giving up meat during Lent, praying the Liturgy of the Hours, observing feast days and holy days of obligation. More dramatically, many are embracing Catholic sexual teaching, the part of Catholicism most at odds with contemporary culture. This means accepting that sex belongs only in marriage, that contraception is morally problematic, that pornography is sinful, that gender is not self-determined. Sarah Mitchell, a 29-year-old environmental scientist from Portland who converted 2 years ago, addresses this directly. "I'm the demographic that's supposed to find Catholic sexual teaching oppressive, educated feminist from a liberal city. But after a decade of hookup culture and dating apps, Catholic teaching on sexuality felt like the only framework that treated sex as truly sacred rather than recreational. The secular, progressive world told me my body was mine, to do with as I pleased, but then treated sex as trivial. Catholicism says sex is so profound it needs boundaries." This is where the conversion boom becomes genuinely shocking. People are converting to the faith specifically because of its difficult countercultural demands, not despite them. This is Cultural Undercurrents. I spend weeks researching trends mainstream media misses, interviewing dozens of people, analyzing data, reading academic studies to bring you stories about how American culture is actually changing beneath the surface noise. If you value journalism that goes beyond hot takes and Twitter controversies to examine real patterns in real people's lives, subscribe and click the bell icon. Every video is fully researched, every claim sourced, because understanding what's actually happening matters more than confirming what we already believe. I'm genuinely curious, are you seeing this in your own life? Do you know someone who's converted to a traditional religion recently, or are you considering it yourself? Drop a comment with your city and whether you've noticed this trend, and if you're Catholic, cradle, or convert, What would you want people to understand about why someone would choose this in 2026? This community's insights are often more valuable than anything I could research. Modern secular culture promised that if we optimized every area of life, biohacked our bodies, curated our feeds, manifested our desires, chose our own truths, we'd achieve fulfillment. For many converts, that promise catastrophically failed. Dr. Jennifer Wong, a sociologist at Boston College who studies religious conversion, explained, "We're seeing the first generation raised with infinite choice, infinite customization, infinite self-invention, discover that it produces not freedom, but paralysis and meaninglessness. When everything is optional, nothing feels real. When you invent your own values, they feel arbitrary." Catholicism offers the opposite, a received tradition, fixed truths, practices you inherit rather than create. Tyler Chen, our San Francisco software engineer, articulated this: "I could optimize my productivity, my sleep, my diet, my career trajectory. What I couldn't optimize was meaning. I couldn't code my way to understanding why I existed." The secular framework says create your own meaning, but that's like saying create your own oxygen. Meaning doesn't work that way. It has to come from outside yourself, or it's just preference. This generation has discovered what their grandparents could have told them. Total freedom is indistinguishable from total meaninglessness. Constraints, traditions, and received wisdom aren't oppressive. They're the structure that makes freedom meaningful. These converts are living unprecedented amounts of life through screens, work on Zoom, socializing on apps, entertainment streaming, shopping online. Physical reality has become optional, and they're starving for something irreducibly physical. Catholicism delivers. You physically kneel, you taste bread and wine, you smell incense, you make the sign of the cross with your actual hand on your actual body. You can't attend Mass through a screen. Well, you can, but everyone agrees it's not the same. The faith insists on embodied participation. Grace Hartman, our Chicago public defender, said, "Everything else in my life can be virtual, mediated, pixelated. Mass forces me into my body, into physical space, into unmediated reality." I think my generation is converting because we're desperate to be reminded we have bodies, that physical reality still matters, that we exist in 3 dimensions plus time. The sacraments, baptism, communion, confession, marriage, are all intensely physical. You're marked with water, you consume physical elements, you speak words aloud, you join bodies. In an increasingly virtual world, this physicality feels radical and necessary. American institutions are collapsing. Trust in media, government, education, medicine, and corporations has cratered. Everything feels unstable, politicized, captured by partisan interests. What can you build your life on when every institution seems corrupt or crumbling? Enter the Catholic Church, 2,000 years old, survived the fall of Rome, weathered the Reformation, outlasted the Soviet Union. It's the longest continuously operating institution in human history. And for people drowning in institutional chaos, that permanence is attractive. Yes, the church has scandals, horrific ones, particularly the abuse crisis. But here's what converts consistently say: the church's brokenness is acknowledged in its own theology. It doesn't claim its leaders are perfect. It claims its teaching is true despite imperfect humans. Original sin applies to popes and bishops too. Father Marcus Reeves observed, "Converts aren't naive about church problems. They often know the scandals better than cradle Catholics. But they distinguish between the institution's sins and its sacred tradition. They're looking for something that's weathered human corruption for millennia and still transmits truth. That's actually more trustworthy than new institutions that haven't been tested." Catholicism has something most religious traditions lack: a sophisticated intellectual tradition engaging with philosophy, science, art, and politics at the highest levels. You can be intellectually serious and Catholic. In fact, it almost demands it. The conversion pipeline often runs through books, Converts discover G.K. Chesterton, read Thomas Aquinas, encounter contemporary Catholic philosophers like Alasdair MacIntyre or theologians like Pope Benedict XVI. They find arguments they can't dismiss, intellectual frameworks that actually explain reality better than secular alternatives. James Park, our Austin marketing director, described his conversion. I was reading political philosophy trying to understand why liberalism seemed to be failing. That led me to MacIntyre, who argues that Enlightenment rationality severed ethics from teleology, from any sense of human purpose. His solution points toward Aristotelian Thomistic virtue ethics, which is Catholic moral theology. I converted because Catholic philosophy had better answers to political questions than anything in secular liberalism or conservatism. This is radically different from evangelical conversions, which typically emphasize emotional experience. Catholic converts are reading dense theological texts, listening to philosophy podcasts, attending lectures on natural law theory. The faith appeals to their intellects first, often years before their hearts. What's accelerated the trend is that Catholicism has become unexpectedly culturally relevant. High-profile intellectuals and artists are converting or identifying as Catholic, making the faith socially permissible in spaces where it was previously considered backward. In 2023, political theorist Patrick Deneen, author of Why Liberalism Failed, announced his conversion. Rapper and producer Kanye West, released a gospel album and began exploring Catholicism. Actors like Shia LaBeouf publicly discussed conversion. Even in tech, figures like Antonio Garcia Martinez, former Facebook engineer and author, converted and wrote about it. More importantly, Catholic intellectuals are dominating certain cultural conversations. Sohrab Ahmari, Adrian Vermeule, and Gladden Papin represent Catholic integralism in political theory. Philosophers like Edward Fegzer are making Thomistic arguments in mainstream venues. Podcasts like The Magnificast and Pints with Aquinas have massive young audiences. This creates social proof. You can be Catholic and cool, Catholic and intellectually sophisticated, Catholic and culturally engaged. That wasn't true 20 years ago when Catholicism seemed exclusively associated with elderly immigrants and conservative politics. Social media has created conversion pipelines that didn't exist before. Someone encounters a Catholic meme account, follows Catholic Twitter, watches Catholic YouTube theology explainers, joins Catholic Discord servers. They're catechized by the internet before they ever walk into a church. This matters because it bypasses the traditional barrier, physical proximity to Catholic community. You can be exploring Catholicism in rural Wyoming or secular Seattle, finding community and content online, then seeking out a parish once you're already intellectually convinced. The content isn't dumbed down either. Catholic YouTube features multi-hour lectures on obscure theological debates, Latin Mass tutorials, systematic theology series. The audience shows up because they want depth, not spiritual snacks. The limits of customization. The Catholic boom reveals that the cultural promise of infinite customization has failed. The capacity to design your own life, choose your own truth, and create your own meaning hasn't delivered fulfillment. It's delivered anxiety, meaninglessness, and fragmentation. People are converting to Catholicism because it's the opposite of customizable. You don't get to pick which doctrines you like. You don't get a personalized Jesus. You inherit 2,000 years of teaching, ritual, and practice that you didn't invent and can't modify. And that rigidity is the attraction. The crisis of authority. This trend exposes our authority crisis. In rejecting all external authority, traditional morality, institutional wisdom, received truths, modern culture created a vacuum. We're left with only one authority, the self. And the self, it turns out, is a terrible foundation for meaning. Catholicism says you're not the ultimate authority on reality, morality, or meaning. That's not oppressive. That's liberating. You can stop the exhausting work of self-invention and instead be formed by something greater than yourself. The hunger for tradition. Perhaps most profoundly, The boom reveals how tradition-starved modern people are. We live in a permanent present, disconnected from the past, uncertain about the future. Catholic converts are people desperate to belong to a story larger than their individual lives, a story with deep roots and transcendent purpose. Sarah Mitchell, our Portland environmental scientist, captured this. Modern progressivism told me the past was nothing but oppression to overcome. Modern conservatism told me to return to a fabricated 1950s. Catholicism connected me to actual history, saints and martyrs and mystics and scholars across 2 millennia. I'm part of something that predates America, predates modernity, predates everything I thought was permanent. That's the opposite of rootless. The future projection. Looking ahead, expect this trend to accelerate, especially if broader cultural instability continues. The more chaotic society becomes, the more attractive permanence and tradition appear. However, this creates tension within Catholicism itself. Young converts want traditional liturgy and serious theology. Church leadership often prefers modern, accessible approaches. The energy in Catholic parishes increasingly comes from converts and young families seeking tradition, while established parish structures were designed for an older, declining population. This generational divide will shape American Catholicism's future. Will the institution embrace the traditional practices, attracting converts, or will it modernize further and risk losing its distinctive appeal? The quiet Catholic boom reveals 4 truths about contemporary America. First, the crisis isn't religious versus secular, it's meaningful versus meaningless. People aren't converting because they're anti-science or anti-modernity. They're converting because secular modernity hasn't delivered on its promises. Second, difficulty is attractive. In a culture that removes every obstacle, that optimizes every friction point, that makes everything easy and comfortable, people are starving for something that demands sacrifice, discipline, and transformation. Third, we underestimated how desperate people are for truth claims that don't bend to cultural pressure. In a world of infinite relativism, absolute truth claims feel like solid ground. Fourth, the future might be more religious than we thought, but in unexpected ways. Not the religion of our grandparents, and not the culture war Christianity of conservative politics, but ancient traditions embraced by young, educated, culturally engaged people who discovered that wisdom traditions actually contain wisdom. Here's what haunts me about these conversion stories. What does it say about our moment that young, educated Americans, the demographic that was supposed to be irreversibly secular, are converting to history's oldest and most institutionally traditional form of Christianity? Tyler Chen, Grace Hartman, James Park, Sarah Mitchell, these aren't people retreating from modernity. They're Silicon Valley engineers, public defenders, marketing directors, scientists. They've succeeded by modern standards and found those standards wanting. They tried secular optimization and discovered it optimizes everything except what matters most. Maybe the story we've been telling about secularization was wrong. Maybe it's not that religion becomes obsolete as societies modernize. Maybe it's that certain forms of religion collapse while others, particularly those with intellectual depth, embodied practices, and institutional permanence, become more attractive precisely because they offer what secular modernity cannot. The Catholic Church claims it has the truth. Not a truth, not your truth, not a perspective. The truth. In an age of epistemic chaos, that claim is either insanely arrogant or profoundly necessary. These converts have decided it's the latter. If this investigation challenged your assumptions about religion, secularism, and who's actually converting to what in America, subscribe to Cultural Undercurrents. We explore the trends beneath the headlines, the quiet migrations of belief, practice, and identity reshaping American life. New investigative deep dives every week on religion, politics, culture, and the forces you're not hearing about anywhere else. Because American religion isn't dying, it's transforming. And the conversions happening right now, young atheists choosing ancient liturgy, tech workers embracing church authority, progressive urbanites submitting to traditional morality, those conversions are telling us something crucial about what human beings actually need that our culture has stopped providing. Pay attention to the converts, they're early signals of where culture is heading next, even if nobody's ready to admit it yet.